Hi everyone, so this is the second video of the low and stable inflation rate mini-series, which is essentially the second government macroeconomic objective in the macroeconomic objectives series. In this video, I'm going to discuss the possible consequences of having a high inflation rate, and I'll also discuss the possible consequences of deflation. So let's get started. So what are some of the possible consequences of a high inflation rate? The first one is loss of purchasing power. Usually people's incomes, if there's a high inflation rate, people's incomes will not rise by the same rate, which means that the same amount of income can now buy fewer goods and services. So while your income's the same, the purchasing power of that income has fallen. This creates greater uncertainty. Now, when people are uncertain, this affects investors negatively. People are less likely to invest, and it causes anxiety for workers and employers. Workers don't really know how much of a wage increase they should ask for. It might lead to strikes and industrial unrest. Employers don't also know whether they should invest or whether they should hire more workers or how much to increase wages by. So it just creates a lot of uncertainty and pessimism and loss of confidence in the economy. It has redistributive effects. Usually inflation hits lower income individuals and households harder than it hits the higher income individuals and households, because usually the lower income individuals and households rely mostly on their incomes, while higher income individuals and households are more likely to own other assets like houses and properties that might actually rise in value with inflation. Inflation benefits borrowers and debtors. So people who owe debt and borrowers, they feel like the value of their debt falls, but it harms savers and creditors and lenders. They're usually harmed by inflation. So that's also a redistributive effect, because it redistributes money from the people who are harmed, the savers and the creditors, to the people who are benefited. It also benefits homeowners. If you own your home, inflation is good because the general average price level of houses is rising, but it does harm home renters who may face much higher rental rates for their homes. So these are distributive effects. Also, inflation leads to less saving because of the uncertainty and the loss of purchasing power created. People are less likely to save. People are not very confident. And if why would I save if my money will lose its value over time? It could also lead to a damage in the country's export competitiveness. Exports are the goods and services that the country sells to foreigners. If local goods become more expensive, foreigners will less likely demand the country's exports. So these are all possible consequences of having a high inflation rate. Now remember, inflation itself is not a bad thing. I'm talking about having a high inflation rate. It is healthy to have a low and stable rate of inflation, which can be between 2 to 4 or 2 to 3%. It is healthy to have some inflation, but having a high, unstable inflation rate is what causes all of these negative consequences. We also need to be able to discuss the possible consequences of deflation. First, let's distinguish between good deflation and bad deflation. Good deflation is caused by improvements in technology and more efficient methods of production, and therefore increased productivity. So good deflation is caused by an increase in the short-run aggregate supply and possibly the long-run aggregate supply curves. That is good deflation. This is due to increased efficiency and productivity. Bad deflation, on the other hand, and this is the one we're discussing the consequences of here, is caused by falls in aggregate demand. That's the type of deflation you want to avoid, because bad deflation leads to high levels of cyclical unemployment. When there is deflation, people often delay their purchases. Why would I buy something if I expect prices to keep falling? This is called deferred consumption. Lower consumption leads to lower aggregate demand. Businesses will have lots of unsold stock. They are more likely to lay off workers. These workers will have less money. Therefore, they will spend less, even causing an even lower aggregate demand, more business, and it becomes this spiral that's just this negative spiral of unemployment and further deflation. Deflation could also result in a lot of bankruptcies. Lots of businesses may shut down due to the decreased aggregate demand and making huge losses, and they may not be able to pay back their debts. This leads to decreased business confidence and lower investment, which is very harmful for the economy. Deflation also has a negative impact on debtors. So homeowners, for example, who have mortgages, people who owe debt, they will see the value of their homes fall relative to the value of their debts. This could lead to decreased consumer confidence and then people spending even less and businesses firing even more workers, and it becomes a deflationary spiral. So remember, a lot of students think, well, if the average price level is falling, this must be a good thing. Not necessarily. You need to distinguish between good deflation and bad deflation. Bad deflation has these negative consequences here that I explained and discussed. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.